Back in the spring of 1874, just as the snow melted off the high ridges of the Bitterroot Mountains, there came a man with dust on his boots and a pig in his wagon. Name was Eli Thompson. Folks in the Montana Territory didn't think much of him. Quiet feller, small eyes, lean build, worked odd jobs, and didn't stir no trouble. But that year, Eli came to town with a notion, so wild it still gets passed around campfires. He was looking for a wife. Now, most men might try their hand at courting. Buy a ribbon, write a letter, maybe make awkward talk at a Sunday social. Not Eli. He went straight to old Boone McAllister's homestead, rapped on the crooked wooden door, and said flat out, "I got a pig. She's fat, healthy, and she don't bite. I'll trade her for your daughter." Boone, who'd run through 5 sons and 2 wives before drink and bad luck whittled him down to one stubborn daughter, spat into the dust and said, "Which one?" "Whichever one won't cry about it," Eli replied. Now Boone only had one left, Annabelle, 17 and mean as a mule with a burr under its saddle. She didn't smile, didn't sing, didn't stitch pretty dresses or bake pies like other girls. She kept the animals fed, broke horses better than most men, and stared down every fool that tried to charm her. Boone shrugged. Done. And just like that, the pig changed hands. And so did Annabelle. The town didn't know what to make of it. Some folks were outraged. Others just shook their heads and muttered, "It's the frontier." But none of them expected what came next. Eli and Annabelle drove off in his wagon, silent as shadows. They settled on a forgotten stretch of land near the edge of the forest, where the river curved like a snake, and no one passed through unless they were lost. Eli had a half-built cabin and 2 goats. Annabelle brought a knife, a sack of beans, and the pig, who she insisted on naming Clementine, and refused to eat. They didn't talk much, those first weeks. Just worked. Eli fixed the roof. Annabelle hauled water and hunted rabbits. At night, she sat by the fire, whittling little horses out of wood. He never asked why. She never offered. But the land had a way of softening even the sharpest edges. One morning, Eli woke to the sound of laughter, not loud, not full, but unmistakable. He found Annabelle barefoot in the river, sleeves rolled up, chasing Clementine through the shallows. The pig squealed. The girl laughed. And for the first time, he saw her face change, like a thundercloud giving way to sun. He didn't say nothing. Just sat on a log, watched, and thought maybe this wasn't such a strange bargain after all. What neither of them knew was that trouble was already riding down from the hills. 3 men who'd once worn badges and now wore guns for pay. And they had a bone to pick with Eli Thompson. But that's a tale for another fire. The men came down from the Bitterroots with the storm at their backs. They called themselves lawmen once. Marshall D. Coulter, his brother Boone, no kin to the old man who traded off Annabelle, and a wiry little rat named Seth Red-Eye Gorman. But that was years and a half-dozen crimes ago. Now they answer to nobody but their guns and the weight of grudges long unpaid. See, back in Missouri, Eli Thompson used to be known as Elias Thorne, deputy to a sheriff who vanished one night, last seen riding west with a satchel full of bribe money and a bullet hole in his hat. Rumor had it Elias knew more than he said, maybe even pocketed some silver himself. The law had questions. Deke had revenge. And now they all had horses pointed straight for that crooked little cabin by the river. Annabelle was getting a rabbit when she spotted Am. 3 riders cutting through the mist like devils born of the rain. She didn't flinch, just set down her blade, wiped her hands on her apron, and stepped onto the porch with Clementine squealing behind her. Eli was chopping wood out back, shirt soaked, eyes sharp. "They're coming," Annabelle said. Eli turned. He didn't ask who. He knew. The past don't knock polite. It kicks the door in when your guard's down. "How many?" 3. One with a scar like a crooked river. One with a limp. One looks like a snake forgot how to die. Eli's mouth was a hard line. He hadn't picked up a rifle in 2 winters. Thought maybe he'd buried that part of himself under enough logs and silence. Guess he was wrong. "You can run," he said. Annabelle looked at him like he'd offered her spoiled milk. "Run where?" "I live here now. This place, it's the first one that don't expect me to smile or serve tea." "You want me gone. You'll have to bury me too. He looked at her long, then nodded. They made ready. Eli laid out his old scattergun, oiled the hinge, loaded both barrels. Annabelle filled the kettle, stoked the fire, and placed Clementine in the root cellar with a stern warning. You squeal, pig, and we both die. Then she sat on the porch, needle in hand, calmly patching a hole in his shirt while the storm rolled in. By dusk, the riders had arrived. Deke Halter swung down first. Big man, mean eyes, coat too clean. Boone had a limp from some forgotten brawl. Red Eye was already grinning, hand twitching by his belt. You Elias Thorne? Deke growled. Name's Eli Thompson, he said, stepping from the cabin. Don't reckon I owe you nothing but dust. Deke spat. You owe me a brother and a badge. You stole my name, my chance, and a satchel of coin. I stole nothing, Eli said. Your brother stole first. And the badge. It don't shine so well in the dirt. Red Eye laughed. We gonna talk all night or? That's when the shotgun roared. Annabelle didn't blink. Her finger was steady. Red Eye's shoulder turned into meat and mist, and he crumpled with a wheeze like a kick bellows. Deke shouted, drew, fired once, missed. Boone ran, limped, tripped, and never got back up. The last shot cracked across the hollow, echoing off the trees like thunder breaking stone. Silence followed. Annabelle stood calm, smoke curling from the barrel. Eli hadn't moved. Deke Halter lay face first in the mud, the debt paid in full. Later, after the sky cleared and Clementine was set free from the cellar, Eli asked her, You ever killed before? Annabelle didn't answer right away. No, she said at last, but I've been wanting to. Eli just nodded, and that night they sat by the fire, no words between them, but a new kind of understanding, one forged in smoke and blood, and the kind of silence only earned through war. And out there in the dark, the wind carried whispers of a girl traded for a pig, who wouldn't smile, but would stand her ground with the fiercest of men. The next morning came soft and gray, like a blanket still warm from the fire. The storm had passed, and so had the danger for now. But the air smelled of gunpowder and old regrets. Red Eye and Boone lay buried beneath a pine ridge Eli had carved himself. Deke Halter? Well, he was buried deeper. Eli never said where. Annabelle didn't ask. That day, she cleaned the shotgun, fed Clementine, and baked a mess of ash cakes with rabbit fat and apple slices. Not because anyone told her to, but because the sun came through the window just right, and the kitchen finally felt like hers. Eli came in from the field around noon, arms covered in dirt and fence wire scratches. You cooked, he said, surprised. Annabelle didn't look up. You hungry? He was. They ate in silence, but not the heavy kind. This silence had room to breathe. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? Eli asked after a while. She didn't answer right away. Took a bite of apple instead, chewed it slow. My mama, she said, taught me with a broom handle. Told me men listen better when they're looking down a barrel. Eli chuckled, a sound rare as spring water in summer. She's still alive? Annabelle shook her head. Buried under an elm. Next to my sister. Next to the man she married who did em both wrong. He didn't ask for more. She didn't offer. By week's end, word of what happened had drifted through the valley. Folks who once whispered about the girl traded for a pig now said her name with a mix of awe and fear. Some called her wild. Others called her a witch. One man in town said he'd seen her stare down a mountain lion through a window and make it turn away. The truth was simpler. Annabelle didn't blink when she ought to. She didn't cry when most women would. And she didn't wait to be rescued. But one thing hadn't changed. She still didn't dance. Not until the day of the fall harvest. The town of Eldergrove wasn't much. A general store, a church with cracked windows, and a saloon called the Hogshead that served more lies than whiskey. But come harvest time, they strung up lanterns, rolled out barrels of cider, and let the music loose. Eli wasn't one for crowds, but Annabelle, strangely, wanted to go. Said she needed to see who was afraid of her and who would meet her eyes. So they went. She wore a plain brown dress and boots still dusted from the trail. No frills. No fuss. Just Annabelle, walking beside Eli like she wasn't the most talked-about woman this side of the Rockies. When they stepped into the dance square, all the noise went hush. A man spilled his drink. A woman clutched her pearls. Even the fiddler stopped mid-bow. But Annabelle didn't flinch. She walked up to the cider barrel, poured herself a cup, and took a long drink like she owned the place. Then, as the music started again, soft, unsure, she turned to Eli and said, "You dance?" Eli blinked. "Not well." "Well enough," she said, grabbing his hand. And in front of every staring soul in Eldergrove, Annabelle, mean, silent, sharp-edged Annabelle, danced slow and steady with the man who traded a pig for her. Someone gasped when she smiled. That night, as they rode home under a sky full of stars and silence, Eli asked, "You ever think about leaving? Starting over somewhere they don't know your name?" Annabelle looked up at the stars. "No, let him talk," she said. "They'll stop when they find someone else to fear." Eli nodded. "You scared?" She shook her head. "No, but they should be." By the first frost of November, Eli's cabin had grown into a homestead. Not big, not fancy, but sturdy. The kind of place built by two hands that knew work and one woman who didn't suffer fools. Annabelle carved out a garden patch by the south fence, braced the henhouse walls, and even built a smokehouse with nothing but Eli's axe and her own stubborn grit. Folks who used to laugh about the pig trade now whispered a little lower when they saw her ride into town. Even the preacher stopped to skin if she'd like to confess anything dear. They didn't know it, but they were watching a legend sprout roots. Still, peace don't last long out west. Not with greed lurking in men's hearts and fire hiding behind every dry pine. That winter, a man named Milton Grady came to the ridge. Milton was what folks called land-hungry. He'd buy up plots, fence in public trails, and squeeze out homesteaders like juice from a peach. Word was he'd already forced out the Collins family, a widow named Ruth and her two boys, took their claim over a misfiled deed, and burned their barn just to be sure they wouldn't come back. Now he'd set his eyes on the river bend, Eli's land. He came riding in one morning with two hired men, rifles across their saddles and papers in hand. Eli was fixing the porch rail. Annabelle was grinding cornmeal by the smokehouse. Clementine was rooting in the garden patch, tail twitching like she knew trouble was near. Milton dismounted slow, like he owned the soil. "Mr. Thompson," he said, holding out the paper. "Seems this plot was registered in my father's name 20 years back. I'm here to collect." Eli wiped his hands. Didn't touch the paper. "That deed's dust," he said. "I've worked this land, built on it, paid for it fair and square." Milton smiled with no humor in it. "That don't matter now." Annabelle stepped up then, rag in one hand, a hatchet in the other. "You planning to build a house over my kitchen?" she asked. Milton's eyes flicked to her, then to the pig sniffing his boot. He smirked. "Traded for you, didn't he?" "That's the story." Annabelle didn't blink. "Best trade he ever made. The pig bites less." Clementine, as if on cue, chomped down on Milton's boot heel. He yelped, stumbled, and the rifle on his back slipped. In a blink, Annabelle had the hatchet at his throat. "Tell your men to stand down," she said. They didn't move. I said now. They did. Milton, red-faced and shaking, stepped back. "This ain't over." "No," Annabelle said. "It's just started." That night, the ridge burned. Not the house, but the far field, the fence line, and the old hunting shed Eli used to keep tools in. Fire danced like devils on the dry grass, eating up every inch of the western slope. Eli was already hauling water buckets when Annabelle ran out with the shotgun. Clementine squealed, darted toward the shed, then turned back, grunting wild. "She's pointing." Annabelle shouted, "What?" "There's someone inside." Eli ran after her, cloth over his mouth. And sure enough, curled in the corner of that burning shed was a boy, Ruth Collins's youngest, barely 12. Eyes wide, coughing hard. Annabelle yanked him out while the flames licked at her coat. Eli soaked a blanket and smothered the door just long enough for her to run through. The boy was burned, but breathing. Said Grady's men grabbed him near the creek, left him in the shed to scare folks off. Eli looked at the fire, then at Annabelle, then at the pig. "Clementine," he said, shaking his head. "I'll be Don Gade." Annabelle just nodded. She's got good instincts. They saved the ridge that night, and the next morning, when the sheriff came riding up, he found a pig with soot on her ears, a boy wrapped in blankets, and a woman standing in the ash with a hatchet in her belt and a look that'd make a bear turn back. Milton Grady was gone, left before sunrise. Word is he sold off half his claims and moved to Kansas. He never came back. But the legend of the woman with the pig, who bid land barons, that never left. By the time snow started clinging to the ridges, Annabelle had made herself more than a homesteader. She was the spine of the land. Folks brought her seeds to test in spring soil, asked her to bless cattle with nothing more than her gaze, and whispered that if she spit on your fence post, no bandit'd ever cross it. Eli just smiled through his beard and kept fixing gates. But even out here, where wolves howled louder than newsboys, word traveled. And one icy morning, a stranger rode in from the south. He was tall, wrapped in a black duster stiff with trail grit, and he bore a scar down his left cheek, clean and straight, like it had been carved with purpose. On his right hand sat a silver ring, old and dull, shaped like a serpent swallowing its tail. He didn't knock, just tied his horse to the porch post, leaned on the rail, and waited for someone to come out. It was Annabelle. She opened the door with her sleeves rolled and a shotgun resting across her arms. "Don't believe we know each other," she said. "No," the man answered, voice like wind through dry pine. "But I knew your husband." She didn't blink. "What's your name?" "Preacher," he said, "though I ain't holy." She stepped outside, boots crunching on the frostbit grass. Eli was up in the field, but she didn't call him. "Not yet. You want to come in?" she said. "You'll need to tell me why." Preacher smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "I've been tracking a man. Used to ride under the name Elias Thorne. Shot my brother in the back. Took what wasn't his." Annabelle didn't flinch. Didn't shift her grip on the gun. "Your brother ride with Deke Halter?" Preacher's jaw tightened. "You know that name." "I do," she said. "He and his men came here to dig up old bones. We buried them." Preacher stared long, then nodded. "I ain't here for vengeance," he said. "Not yet. I'm here for truth." They sat by the fire that night, Eli beside her, the stranger across from them with a cup of weak coffee and a gaze that didn't blink either. Clementine dozed in the corner, snoring like thunder. "Deke wasn't just after revenge," Preacher said. "He had a map, a land claim, secret and signed by a dead man's hand. He thought your husband had it." Eli looked up slow. "I burned that map years ago. Nothing but cursed dirt and blood." "Still," Preacher said, "others'll come. Men worse than me. Hungrier." Annabelle's voice was quiet. "Then let him." Preacher chuckled, a low, dry sound. "I believe you." He rose, dusted off his coat, and placed a silver coin on the table, for the fire and the coffee. Then he paused. "You ever heard of a place called Widow's Bone?" he asked. Eli frowned. "Old mining town. Burned out. Haunted, some say." Preacher nodded. "That's where the others are heading. If I were you, I'd keep my back to the wind." And just like that, he was gone. Later, after the snow fell thick and the fire burned low, Eli turned to her. "You believe him?" Annabelle was sewing, her hand steady. "I believe he believes it." "And Widow's Bone?" She tied off her thread. "If they come, we'll deal with it, like we always do." Eli nodded, quiet. Then she added, almost to herself, "I think we're more than just a tale now, Eli. We're a warning." He reached over, took her hand in his. "No," he said, "we're a home." And outside, beneath a pale moon and drifting snow, Clementine grunted once, rolled over, and settled in for the long winter. Winter thickened like molasses left out in the cold, slow, heavy, and mean. Eli and Annabelle kept the hearth blazing, mended tools, and dug into the last of the smoked venison. Outwardly, life was quiet, peaceful, but the mention of Widow's Bone sat heavy in their home, like a loaded pistol on a supper table. Then one day in January, a rider came from town. Little Ben Alcott, no taller than a saddle horn, but brave as a wildcat. They found a man, he said breathless, up near the ruins, frozen solid, had a letter in his coat, addressed to you. Eli took the note with gloved fingers. The paper crackled, stiff with ice. Ink blurred, but the name was clear, Elias Thorne. He didn't say a word, just nodded, saddled his horse, and turned to Annabelle. I gotta go. I know, she said, strapping on her coat. I'm coming too. You don't have to. She fixed him with that look. I know, and I am. They reached Widow's Bone by dusk. The town was just bones now, half-burned buildings, old mining shacks with doors swinging in the wind, and the shell of a church blackened by fire. Snow coated everything in silence. Even the crows had moved on. The body lay in the center of what once was the saloon, half buried in drifted snow, mouth open like he'd died mid-sentence. A small iron box sat beside him. Annabelle pried it open with her belt knife. Inside, another map, and beneath that, a silver coin shaped like a star, one Eli recognized immediately. A marshal's badge, he muttered. The name on the back read, G. Halter. Annabelle looked up. Deakskin. Eli nodded. His father. Then why was he buried like this? Eli's voice was low. 'Cause Deke didn't want the world to know he ran from his daddy's name. That badge was meant for justice. Deke used it for power. Annabelle looked out over the ruins. You think this was what he was after all along? Eli shook his head. No, he wanted to bury the past. But the past didn't want to stay buried. They made camp inside what used to be the jail. Small, tight, and shielded from the wind. Clementine stayed back at the homestead, guarding the hens and looking smug about it. Annabelle couldn't sleep. Too many shadows in the rafters. Too many names in the snow. So she rose, wrapped herself in a blanket, and walked the edge of the ghost town. That's when she saw the fire, faint, orange, flickering, up near the old church. She crept closer, rifle in hand. And there he was, preacher, sitting by a dying fire, boots crossed, hat pulled low. I knew you'd come, he said. Annabelle didn't lower the rifle. Why? Because ghosts don't sleep. They haunt the ones still breathing. She stepped forward, slow. You gonna tell me the truth now? Preacher smiled without teeth. Widow's Bone was a lie. A decoy. What Deke really wanted was the badge. And the box. I reckon he thought it might buy him back into the world he burned. Annabelle narrowed her eyes. And what do you want? He looked at her then, solemn. Redemption. Next morning, Eli found her standing by the ruins, frost clinging to her lashes. You all right? She nodded. I know what we gotta do. They buried the badge beneath the church's bell tower, wrapped the map in oilskin, and sealed it inside the coffin the marshal had died clutching. Then they nailed the lid shut, burned sage, and left the ghosts to rest. As they turned to ride, Annabelle glanced back one last time. Think that'll be the end of it? Eli asked. No, she said, spurring her horse, but it's enough for now. Spring came late to the valley. Snow clung to the hills like a grudge, and the river roared with melted memory. Eli patched the roof, while Annabelle planted onions, potatoes, and a stubborn row of beans that Clementine kept trying to unearth. Life, for the moment, was calm. That's when the banker's son arrived. Town called him Henry Weatherby, Jr., but he fancied himself a gentleman, had the gall to wear gloves on a trail ride, and boots polished enough to catch the sun. He rolled into town with a hired escort and a satchel of papers, claiming he'd come to audit holdings from his father's estate. The real truth was simpler. He was hunting gold, the kind buried under land in silence. He came to Eli's homestead on the third Sunday of April. No warning, no invite. Annabelle opened the door before he knocked. You're on private land, she said, calm as snow. Henry smiled. And you're standing on inherited debt. This valley's full of muddied claims. My father lent money to half the ridge and never got his due, including this place. Eli stepped out, wiping his hands. Weatherby never lent me a thing. Henry nodded. Not to you. To the man before you. Jacob Leary. He borrowed heavy, died broke, and the land was never rightfully cleared. Annabelle's eyes narrowed. That was 10 years ago. Doesn't matter, Henry said. Law's still law. Unless you have proof. Eli folded his arms. What do you want? Henry didn't blink. Half your crop. Every season. And a claim on the well. Annabelle laughed, once sharp and mean. Or, Henry said. I bring papers to court, and the court brings a rope. They rode into town the next morning. Not to argue. To settle. Eli brought a bundle of deeds, all notarized by the former sheriff. Annabelle carried her shotgun, just in case. The new judge was a man named Ransom Holt, dry as a biscuit and twice as plain. He listened, peered over his glasses, and said, Technically, Mr. Weatherby has a case. Annabelle stepped forward. Technically, she said, I have a pig with more sense than this court. The room went still. Then she reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded letter, yellowed with time, signed in ink that bled at the edges. My mother was Jacob Leary's sister, she said. He left the land to her. She left it to me. That letter's dated and signed before his debt was ever filed. Henry snatched it. Read it. His face fell. The judge leaned back. Well, he said, that settles it. Henry looked up, pale. She's bluffing. Annabelle stepped close, her voice low. You call me a liar again. I'll make you eat that satchel, one word at a time. He didn't. Outside, as the crowd dispersed, Eli looked at her. Where'd you get that letter? Annabelle shrugged. Found it years ago. Never figured I'd need it. He smiled slow. You always this prepared? No, she said, looking down the trail. But this land's ours, and I aim to keep it. As they rode back, Henry packed up and left town. Fast. Too fast to notice that Clementine had gnawed clean through one of his wagon wheels. She didn't squeal about it, but she looked mighty proud. The wild, it keeps its own kind of silence. Out there in the hush between wind gusts and whippoorwills, secrets have a way of whispering when no one's listening. And one of them, maybe the biggest, was digging at the roots of that homestead like a mole in spring thaw. It started with Clementine. She'd been acting strange, rooted in behind the smokehouse, scratching at the old sod cellar, and snorting every time Annabelle passed by with a shovel. Eli thought she'd gone peculiar. Annabelle. She knew better. Animals don't act without reason, she said, setting down her spade. Let's dig. So they did. Took near 2 hours to clear the brush and rot and reach the thing buried underneath, an old iron box, rusted at the hinges, sealed tight as a banker's vault. Took Eli's pry bar and all Annabelle's patience to crack it open. Inside was a Bible, and inside that Bible, tucked between Psalms and Proverbs, was a stack of folded letters, a photograph faded near to ghost, and one piece of paper with a single name. Silas Ambrose. Eli sat back on his heels, dirt on his hands. Ain't heard that name in a long while. Annabelle looked at him. Who is he? Eli didn't speak right away. Used to ride with me, he said finally. Back when I was still Elias Thorne. We wore badges. Chased bandits. Then one day he disappeared. Took a payroll stash from the army with him. Thought he was dead. Annabelle held the photo up to the light. A group of men. Eli, clean-shaven and younger. Beside him, a man with dark eyes, one hand behind his back. Silas. You think this belonged to him? She asked. Must have, Eli said, which means he buried it here, before I ever set foot on this land. Annabelle frowned. Or after. The next day, the man from the east arrived. He came on a chestnut horse, with silver stirrups and a coat too fine for the dust of Montana. Had a watch chain looped across his vest and a voice that carried like a sermon. Afternoon, he said, tipping his hat. Name's Horace Whiteley. I'm looking for Elias Thorne. Annabelle crossed her arms. He's not here. Horace smiled. Pity. I came with news about Silas Ambrose. Eli stepped out from the barn then, slow and measured. You found him? He asked. No, Horace said, dismounting. But others are looking. Pinkertons, mostly. Silas took more than money. Took names. Secrets. You were one of them. Eli stared hard. Why come to me? Horace's smile faded. Because they think you helped him. Annabelle reached for the shotgun leaning by the door. Horace saw it. Didn't flinch. I ain't here to fight, he said. Just to warn. They're coming. And they're not a skin nice. Eli nodded. Let him come. Horace mounted up again. One more thing, he said. If Silas is alive, he'll come for what's his. He tipped his hat once more and rode off into the trees. That night, Eli opened the Bible again, flipped to the front, and saw Silas's name, written in ink, next to the words, "To the one who knows the weight of silence." Annabelle stared into the fire. You think he'll come? Eli's voice was quiet. I think he's already been. And out back, under the light of a swollen moon, Clementine snored deep and content, guarding the biggest secret in the valley. The storm hit just before dawn, lightning cracking across the western ridge, thunder rumbling like a war drum. Eli woke with his hand already reaching for the old Colt under the bed. Annabelle was already on her feet, wrapping her shawl, boots laced and shotgun loaded. They both knew. This wasn't no thunderstorm. This was a warning. By the time the sky cleared, 3 riders were coming up the trail. Suits too stiff for the saddle, badges tucked just out of sight. One had a mustache like a railroad baron, another a scar from cheek to chin. The third, silent cold, was the kind that didn't blink unless he was aiming. Pinkertons, hired hounds for the kind of trouble that don't bother with justice. Annabelle met them at the edge of the property. Turn around, she said. The mustache man smiled, not without a conversation. We don't do those, Eli said, stepping beside her. Scarface leaned forward. We're here for Silas Ambrose. Word is, he left something here. Maybe a partner. Maybe a witness. Annabelle didn't move. You boys ever hear of trespassing? Scarface chuckled. You ever hear of obstruction? The tension cracked like dry kindling. Clementine snorted behind the barn, nostrils flaring. The air smelled like blood and rain. Eli said 3 words. Not on my land. They came back that night. Didn't knock. Didn't speak. Just set fire to the far field and waited to see what would burn. But Annabelle was ready. She pulled the bread oven open, where she'd hidden a Henry rifle 3 days prior, wrapped in oilcloth behind the rising dough. Eli took to the roof, rifle cradled against a shoulder. Clementine, bless her ornery heart, charged straight at the intruders like a 4-legged cannonball, teeth bared. The first Pinkerton fired wide. The second took a shot in the leg before he even saw where it came from. The third, the quiet one, snuck toward the smokehouse and found Annabelle waiting. She didn't hesitate. The butt of her shotgun cracked across his jaw, sent him into the dirt. By morning, the smoke was gone. 2 of the men were tied to fence posts, nursing wounds. The third, he'd vanished into the pines, limping like a ghost with unfinished business. Eli looked at Annabelle, rifle still warm in his hands. You planned for this. She wiped her brow. No, I just knew it was coming. The sheriff came up the ridge 3 days later. You really did it, he said, looking at the prisoners. Annabelle nodded. They lit the fire. We just made sure it didn't spread. The sheriff scratched his beard. Town's talking. Some folks are scared. Others think you ought to run for mayor. Annabelle laughed. I ain't the mayorin' type. The sheriff looked toward the barn, where Clementine was wallowing contentedly in the mud. Well, he said, if you ever do, make sure that pig's your deputy. Back inside, Eli opened the Bible one more time. Tucked inside now was a new note, left in the night, slipped through a crack in the door. You're close. Keep digging. S. Annabelle held it, turned it in her hand. He's watching us, she said. Eli nodded. Let him. Outside, the wind picked up again, but this time it didn't feel like danger. It felt like someone getting ready to come home. Spring bloomed late that year, but when it came all at once, like the land had been holding its breath too long. Wildflowers split through frostbitten soil, bees danced in the sage, and the air smelled like forgiveness. But ghosts don't pay no mind to seasons. And Silas Ambrose came walking out of the trees, one morning like he'd never left the world behind. He was older, thinner, wearing a coat that had more dust than thread. His eyes were the same, sharp, haunted, and full of stories no one had asked to hear. Eli saw him first. Didn't draw his gun. Didn't smile either. "You always come uninvited?" he asked. Silas took off his hat. "Figured I owed you that much." Annabelle stepped out onto the porch, shotgun still in reach. "You been hiding under our dirt?" Silas shook his head. "Just watching. Waiting." "You did better than I expected." Eli folded his arms. "Why'd you come back?" Silas looked toward the barn, where Clementine was sunning herself like royalty. "Because the Pinkertons won't stop. Because that badge I buried came from a marshal who died trying to do right. And because the gold," he paused. "The gold's still out there." Annabelle tilted her head. "You buried it." Silas nodded. "North Ridge, beneath the broken elm. Left it with a body no one was looking for." Eli exhaled. "So that's what they've been chasing. Not justice, just shine." Silas looked down. "I'm tired of running. I came to give you the map. And then I'm gone." Annabelle crossed her arms. "You leave that box here. You don't get to vanish. Not till we've decided what we're going to do with it." Silas studied her. "You changed him, you know." "I didn't change him," she said. "He chose different." Silas nodded once, then reached into his coat and handed over a leather satchel, thin, light, and lined with secrets. He turned to go. "Silas," Eli called. The man paused. "You don't gotta disappear," Eli said. "Not anymore." Silas didn't smile, but he looked lighter. "I might come back someday," he said, "if that pig'll have me." Annabelle grinned. "She likes liars. You'll be fine." And then he was gone. The gold stayed buried. They burned the map the next night, not out of fear, but because some treasures are better left where they sleep. The story, though, that didn't stay buried. It spread. Of a man who traded a pig for a bride. Of a woman who guarded land with her heart, her gun, and a beast with tusks. Of Pinkertons turned away. Of ghosts redeemed. And of a valley that held its own justice. Come summer, the preacher stood on that porch and married Eli and Annabelle beneath lanterns strung from fence posts. Clementine walked between them with a crown of wildflowers round her ears. They never wore rings, just dirt under their nails and fire in their chests. And they lived on that land for the rest of their days. No titles, no fancy plaques. But if you ask anyone in those parts, they'll point north and say, "That's the house where a pig got traded for a bride, and both came out richer than gold."